see the poster.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Richa.
Yeah.
So we have got around 70 or so registered participants. So I think people would join in, and I think I would need to admit them as a join. But I think we can get started because there's a critical mass of people here. So I'll just start off with with an introduction. So just pausing to admit people in between. Yeah. So hello and welcome to this event titled Gandhi 150, which is organized to commemorate in a small way the 150th birth anniversary of Gandhi, or Mahatma Gandhi as he is often referred to. This event is being organized within the context of a collaborative research project which involves Indraprastha Institute of Information Technology, Delhi, and Cochin University of Science and Technology. The project leads from the respective organizations. Tanmoy and Santosh are present here. This is an unusual topic for a seminar held within the engineering and computing parts of the university, but we believe that it's of utmost importance to have conversations around politics and history in each and every part of the university. In fact, through a collaborative project that focuses on fake news detection, we find ourselves having to take positions around deeply political questions. In a way, Gandhi's unfailing commitment to truth, as exemplified in an often referenced quote attributed to him that says that there is no God higher than truth, is more relevant than ever in the post-truth world that we live in. I'll start with a short biographical sketch of Gandhi before handing over to our esteemed speakers. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was born on 2nd of October 1869 in Porbandar, a coastal town in Gujarat state of India. During his youth, Mohandas Gandhi was shy, soft-spoken, and only a mediocre student at school. In 1888, Gandhi set sail for England, where he had decided to pursue a degree in law. Though his elders objected, Gandhi could not be prevented from leaving. In London, he studied law at University College London, where he studied Indian law and jurisprudence and trained as a barrister in the Inner Temple. His time in London was influenced by a vow that he had made to his mother upon leaving India to abstain from meat and alcohol. When in 1915, Gandhi returned to India after a long stint in South Africa, he brought an international reputation as a leading Indian nationalist, theorist, and organizer. He joined the Indian National Congress and was introduced to Indian issues, politics, and the Indian people. Mohandas Gandhi is considered as the father of the Indian independence movement. Gandhi spent 20 years in South Africa working to fight discrimination. It was there that he created his concept of satyagraha, a non-violent way of protesting against injustices. While in India, Gandhi's obvious virtue, a simplistic lifestyle, and minimal dress endeared him to the people. He spent his remaining years working diligently to both remove British rule from India as well as to better the lives of India's poorest classes. Gandhi's first major achievements came in 1918 during the Champaran and Kheda agitations of Bihar and Gujarat. Pursuing a strategy of non-violent protest, Gandhi took the administration by surprise and won concessions from the authorities. He had a firm belief. He had a firm belief. Oops, just a second. I'm sorry. Sorry. He had a firm belief in and asked his followers to employ non-cooperation, non-violence, and peaceful resistance as their weapons in the struggle against the British Raj. His wide popularity among both Hindus and Muslims made his leadership possible. He also fought for the rights of the untouchables, the lowest in the caste system, referring to them by the name Harijans. He lived modestly in self-sufficient residential community and wore the traditional Indian dhoti and shawl woven with yard handspun on a charka. He often undertook long fasts as means of both self-purification and social protest. Gandhi is commonly, not, though not officially, considered as the father of the nation in India. His birthday, 2nd of October, is commemorated there as Gandhi Jayanti, a national holiday, and worldwide as the International Day of Nonviolence. Gandhi had held a firm position that the state shall have no religion. I'll just a second. I'll just share this. Mm, that the state shall have no religion, even if the whole community belongs to one religion. Religion, he said, had to be a purely personal matter. In reality, there are as many religions as minds. Each mind has a different conception of God from the other. He asserted that the state was bound to be wholly secular and that no educational institution should enjoy state patronage. He wanted free India to be the governance of India by the representatives of all people without the distinction of religion. Yet, the icon's legacy is no longer secure in India. Many in the current administration consider V.D. Savarkar a far-right Hindu supremacist who was accused of involvement in Gandhi's assassination as their ideological mentor. A portrait of Savarkar hangs in the Indian Parliament building. However, when you look back at Gandhi's writings and thought, it is easy to see that he anticipated much about the current political moment. Even when you look back at the global political landscape, Gandhi's positions on truth, nonviolence, anti-colonialism, and secularism cannot be more relevant than it is today. Maybe at this point, I'll just start the recording. Just trying to figure out how to. Just a second. Okay. So, with that short introduction on Gandhi, let me conclude and introduce the first of the two esteemed speakers that we have today. Richa Raj is an assistant professor, Department of History at Jesus and Mary College, University of Delhi. Her research interests include subjects such as communalism, socio-religious reform movements, and education in the context of modern Indian history, and most recently, oral history. She earned her PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University for research on the topic of social and political impact of the Arya Samaj movement in North India. She is currently member of the statutory body Academic Council at University of Delhi, serving since February 2017. She served as an invited panelist at the 79th session of the Indian History Congress on the topic of Mahatma Gandhi and making of the Indian nation. The topic of her talk today is Gandhi's Ramrajya, reflections on the social and political philosophy of the Mahatma. So, Richa, we are looking forward to your talk, and I'll hand it over to you. So.
Thank you, Deepak. First of all, I would like to thank you and your team for inviting me over to speak on a topic that is so relevant in times today. That is on Gandhi's ideas of regarding social and political philosophy. His entire idea of Ramrajya, what exactly Ramrajya means, and how he used Ramrajya in his correspondences, in his public addresses, etc. So I would like to begin with this idea that there are two ways of knowing Gandhi. One, Gandhi that exists in contemporary political discourse, where tokenism rather than actual adherence and understanding influences how the image of Gandhi is constructed across hoardings, party banners, institutional events, and public policies. The large purpose of this Gandhi, this constructed Gandhi, is to legitimize public policies rolled out by those in power. The other is the historical Gandhi, extracted from sources such as Gandhi's own writings, be it his autobiography, columns in the newspapers that he wrote in, public addresses, his correspondences, and also what his contemporaries had to say or write about him, both nationally or internationally. This historical Gandhi, unfortunately, remains confined in educational and academic institutions and those set up by the Gandhians, and have also, has been included, which is, of course, fortunately, in the educational curriculum of students of mostly social science since independence in India. The historical Gandhi is relevant nonetheless in contemporary times. Today, I will try and understand Gandhi, locating him in the era that he was politicized in, and in turn, himself politicized. That is the first half of the 20th century. I would also seek to attempt that Gandhi or the Gandhian was a construct of the anti colonial struggle for independence as he sought to negotiate between various communities, religious or otherwise, and left behind a rich legacy of upholding the plurality of the Indian nation. In order to understand the social and political philosophy of Gandhi, we need to know that Gandhi considered himself as a deeply religious person. He called himself a devout Hindu, a Sanatani Hindu at that. But there was a certain modern way in which he understood the meaning of Hinduism, in which he sought to define the meaning of Hinduism. He sought to rescue it from a certain dogmatic understanding of the religion, something that was sectarian in nature. He defined Hinduism as a search after truth through non-violent means. So for him, Hinduism meant a search for truth as well as non-violence. And he also said, along with that, interestingly, he was also highly accommodative of people who did not believe in God. So, there was space for the atheists as well in his understanding of Hinduism. He said that a person may not believe even in God and still can call himself a Hindu. So, Hinduism was for Gandhi a relentless pursuit after truth. It was the most tolerant of religions. As he said, Gandhi said that Hinduism as a creed was all embracing. So, this was a very fascinating way of explaining what Hinduism was and what it meant to Gandhi. Now, for Gandhi, Gandhi was not only someone who was only interested in the application of Hinduism into his social and political policies or experiments, but he also read other religious texts. He called the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, as the most fundamental to his understanding of social life, of religious ideas, of social and political ideas as well. But apart from that, he also read other religious texts, such as the Sermon on the Mount. He also claimed to have read the Quran and also texts on Buddhist philosophy. So he was influenced by the ideas from other religions as well, and most importantly, he sought to imbibe the positive aspects of all religions, and that is what makes him different from other quote unquote religious people, because he was someone who believed in the plurality of religions, in the coexistence of religions, and the fact that each religion had something or the other to teach the other religion. Each religion was a mirror to the other religion. So he was specifically he used the word dharma in his public addresses, uh, but he defined religion in two senses. One, in his critique of fundamentalism or extremism, he used the word religion while talking about its sectarian nature. Religion in a denominational sense, in an institutional sense. So that is in the terms of Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, Sikhism, etc. And in the other, he referred to the term religion in the Indian sense of dharma. That is the moral code that guides a person's life and the social order. He said in 1940, religion does not mean sectarianism. It means a belief in ordered moral government of the universe. This religion transcends Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, etc. It does not supersede them, it harmonizes them and gives them a reality, right? Similarly, in earlier in South Africa, also while working for the rights of the Indians there, he had said, by religion, I do not mean formal religion or customary religion, but by religion, I mean one in which all religions come together face to face with the Maker. So, therefore, religion in the context of social and political life meant for Gandhi a moral, ethical component of life, right? And most importantly, his understanding of religion was not solely based on scripture. He did not believe in the dogmatic authority of scriptures. And probably, it is quite possible that he was influenced by the ongoing attempts of certain states in Europe to secularize religion, right? And he strengthened his idea of dharma uh, through his advocacy of the application of reason to religion, right? And this is, I think, something that the students of computer science and science, etc., may appreciate. That he urged that reason and morality should supersede tradition and scriptures. That just because a scripture has a claim to antiquity, to the classical times, that it was written in the past, it should not be taken as the sole authority to the interpretation of religion. And therefore, he said that, religion should always go through, it should always be vetted through reason, through practicality, and also he was open to the idea that every religion may have certain dogmatic provisions, and it was important to apply those ideas to the current times, to be more practical, right? And also to he also said that in this age of reason, religion or scriptures should be submitted to the acid test of reason and universal justice if it is to ask for universal assent. That if everyone must have to agree to a certain religious injunction, it has to be submitted to the acid test of reason, right? And he also said that let us not, while talking to the orthodox elements within Hinduism, he said that let us not believe that just because everything was written in Sanskrit and printed in the Shastra, it should have a binding effect upon us, right? That which is steeped in morality. For him, morality and ethics was more important. So that which was steeped in morality and which was complementing reason should be accepted by the religious authorities or by people in general, right? So he therefore consistently, whether he was writing in the 20s, 1920s, or 30s or 40s, he was consistently talking about the application of reason in the interpretation of the scriptures. And this he was doing not only for Hindu scriptures, he also, at one occasion when he was asked about Quran, so there too he said that all teachings of Quran must not be accepted as they are, just like in other scriptures too, and everything should be submitted to reason, to practicality, to morality, most important, right? So therefore, his idea of dharma, or his interpretation of dharma, therefore was in a very modernized sense, and something that was inclusive, that would include the larger majority of the people who were listening to him, in the sense that everyone, whether they were atheists or people who belong to the Hindu religious community or Muslim religious community or any other, even Christian missionaries, everyone had something or the other to take from him. Now, this idea of dharma and this interpretation of religion, therefore, opened this path for him to also apply certain religious terms to his political vocabulary, right? Religious terms such as Ramrajya, right? And he often, Gandhi was was someone who wrote a lot. He was someone who read a lot and wrote a lot. There are about 100 volumes of the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi that speaks about the amount of writings that he had done throughout his political career, right? So he has, importantly, when someone would write to him a letter of criticism, on many an occasion he would publish that in the newspapers that he was a part of, Young India and Harijan, etc. And he would write his own response to that criticism. So that was, Gandhi as a perfect journalist. I think there can be another topic, when one can speak on what good journalism is or what ethical journalism should be, right? And here, therefore, we do have on various occasions wherein Ramrajya has been explained by Gandhi in very, very clear terms. He, first of all, said that he wrote about Ramrajya not in a religious term. Not in He did not have a religious meaning to attribute to this particular term. In fact, he used it in the sense of a reign of goodness and justice. And the reason being that in popular Indian mythology, Lord Ram is related to the idea of goodness, to the idea of justice, to the idea of democracy, and so on and so forth. So, it has been alleged by certain people that Gandhi gave a religious coloring to his politics, by using certain symbols of Hindu mythology, using phrases such as Ramrajya. He gave a religious coloring to his political views. And on the other hand, Gandhi's ideas are also used by other group of people to narrow their own forward their own narrow agendas. So both of these groups of people have not clearly understood what Gandhi actually meant, or perhaps have not read all the works of Gandhi, in which he is also consistently evolving his own understandings of certain ideas, certain phrases. He did not use religion in the ideological definition of nationalism or its program. That was very clear. Because in the 1940s, when the debates about what Indian nation should be like, he drew a clear distinction between religion and the state, a point to which I will come to in a moment. But as far as Ramrajya was concerned, he said very clearly that by Ramrajya, I do not mean Hindu Raj, Hindu in a sectarian or a denominational sense. I mean by Ramrajya a divine Raj, that is the kingdom of God, right? And for me, Ram and Rahim are one and the same deity. He also said that I acknowledge no other God but the one God of truth and righteousness, right? And he also often in the 1940s too, he gave an explanation for why he was using the term Ramrajya. He said that because it was a convenient and an expressive phrase, it sort of it was an emotive phrase. It sort of made him emotionally associate with the millions of people in India, right? And that included the Muslims as well. And he said that, when he visited the frontier province or addressed predominantly Muslim audiences, he would express what he means by calling it a Khudai Raj, not necessarily Ram Rajya. Or when he addressed a Christian audience, he would describe what he means, as a government, as the kingdom of God on earth. Right? So for him, it was very much a part of his political vocabulary. It did not have any narrow religious sectarian connotation as such. And he also said that, for me to use any other expression would be self-suppression and hypocrisy. So he was he was very much he knew the fact that such terms would make him more easily associate with the people as such. And this is something that has been acknowledged by many scholars of Gandhi, who say that Gandhi's predecessors, say for instance Surendranath Banerjee, would have used intellectual arguments. They would have used intellectual jargon to while talking to the masses, while talking to the people, and in most probability, the people would not have understood what they were saying. But Gandhi used simple terms. His traditionalism, the fact that the Indianness of his style, of his political articulation, and not just political articulation, but also the way he projected his image to the people in his simple attire, dressing up like a peasant almost. So brought him closer physically, mentally, brought him closer to the millions of Indians back home. And therefore, that made him the invincible leader of the Indian nationalist movement. The fact that he was able to get the millions of people associate with him through this the Indianness of his attire, through the Indianness of his political articulation, made him a great leader. And this is something that has also been seen in how Subhash Chandra Bose, who opposed Gandhism, who opposed, who was a critic of Gandhi, throughout his active political career. Subhash Chandra Bose also said that, when the Mahatma speaks, he does so in a language that the people comprehend, not in the language of Herbert Spencer and Edmund Burke, as for instance, Sir Surendranath Banerjee would have done, but in that of the Bhagavad Gita and the Ramayana. When he talks to them about Swaraj, he does not talk about the virtues of provincial autonomy or of federation. He reminds them of the glories of Ramrajya, the kingdom of the mythical king Rama, and they understand. And he talks of conquering through love and ahimsa, that is non-violence, and they are reminded of Buddha and Mahavira, and they accept him. So it was it was a part of his political vocabulary. It was a part of making him comprehensible to the people who were listening to him, that he used this. And in among many of his quotes on Ramrajya, what he said about Ramrajya, there is one that I find that very easily, very nicely summarizes what he meant by Ramrajya. When he said in 1945 that it can be the word Ramrajya can be religiously translated as kingdom of God on earth, politically translated as perfect democracy, in which inequalities based on possession and non possession, color, race, or creed or sex vanish. In it, land and state belong to the people, justice is prompt, perfect, and inexpensive, and therefore freedom of worship, speech, and the press. All this because of the reign of the self imposed law of moral restraint. Such a state must be based on truth and non-violence and must consist of prosperous, happy, and self contained village and village communities. Right? So he's talking about in his Ramrajya, there is justice that is delivered to everyone. But with that justice also comes a sense of morality. Also talks about equality to everyone, but with that he also couples it with fraternity, the idea of fraternity, the idea of brotherhood, of everyone looking after each other, and especially looking after the weakest sections in the entire society of the Indians, right? So therefore, the usage of the term Ram Rajya radically restructured the Indian national struggle as well. Whereas earlier, before Gandhi popularized this vocabulary and before he mobilized the people towards the Indian national movement, the movement was mainly confined to the elite sections of the Indian society, people who belonged to the upper class. But Gandhi mobilized the people into the Indian national movement by using such words, which he felt would bring the people closer to the Indian national movement. Right. So therefore, he was an important leader in the Indian national movement from the point of view of enlarging the nationalist constituency by incorporating new people into the anti-British struggle. So therefore, in that particular anti-colonial struggle, Gandhi was a symbol of radical changes because he was radicalizing politics by including people into the Indian national movement, the common people who would understand the concept of a just state, who would understand the concept of civil rights through the concept of Ramrajya, right? Now, again, his Ramrajya also included the idea of fusion of dharma or morality into politics. And this is very important. Again, he said that because of his devotion to truth, it was important that politics should not be devoid of religion, right? And again, he often reiterated that religion for him did not mean in a sectarian or a denominational sense, but it meant in a sort of moral, a morality or an ethical code of conduct, right? So in that sense, therefore, he said that politics had to be moral. It had to be based on morality, and therefore, he is one of those leaders who spoke about ethics in politics. Just because he spoke, just like he spoke about ethics in economics, similarly, in politics as well, he was speaking about the infusion of ethics or morality into politics. And he said that uh, he could not isolate politics from religion because his politics was not corrupt. It was based on non-violence and truth. So for him, religion or dharma meant non-violence and truth essentially, right? And importantly, for him, uh, uh, religion or any faith should be a faith that is open to the unifying aspects of life. That is the unifying power of all religions, which he called the union of hearts. And this is again something very important, which laid the foundation of Indian definition of secularism, which meant not a dissociation from religion, but an embracing of all religion, respecting all religions as they were, while at the same time recognizing that all religions had their elements of positive as well as negative ideas that could be also seen as corrupt or dogmatic, right? So, and also he said that, especially for Hinduism, he said that my Hinduism embraces all religions and is very tolerant. It is interesting that Gandhi was talking about the ideas of tolerance way back, in the 1940s as well, especially when the communal and antagonism had sort of flared up in India in a big way. People belonging to different religious communities were talking about their religion being in danger. The Hindu communal groups were saying that Hindus were in danger, and the Muslim communal groups were saying that Islam was in danger, and so on. So at this time, he spoke about his own religion, talking about basically targeting or being critical of those who preach the doctrine of the sword, those orthodox or conservative elements among the Hindus who were talking about violence as a means of establishing Hindu Raj in India. And therefore, he was talking about how Hinduism is actually, that is not true Hinduism. When one says that it is important to and highlight or kill other religious communities, then one is actually killing one's own religion, right? And therefore, he was saying that Hinduism was tolerant. His Hinduism was not sectarian. It included what was best in Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, as well as Zoroastrianism. So, therefore, the idea of tolerance in Hinduism was very crucial to his understanding of Hinduism. And primarily in the 1940s, he began to use more and more the word religion for sectarian or in a sectarian or a denominational sense, because of the way historical developments were coming about in pre-partition India, because of the rise of an extreme stage of communalism in India. And therefore, in his attack on or his criticism of religion that was understood as a sectarian or a denominational sense, he was often talking about how it was important to inculcate trust and brotherhood amongst Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs. He was talking about trust and tolerance. For instance, he said in way back in the 1920s, when the issue of music before the mosques that was being brought about by certain Muslims as being injurious to their religious sentiments, or the issue of cow killing that was being brought about by certain sections of the Hindus as being injurious to their religious sentiments, and therefore a lot of antagonism being created because of these emotive issues, as well as the introduction of Shuddhi and Tabligh in the Indian society. Gandhi said that Hindus must not imagine that they can force the Muslims to give up cow sacrifice. They must trust by befriending Muslims that the latter will, of their own accord, give up cow sacrifice out of regard for their Hindu neighbors. Nor must Muslims imagine that they can force Hindus to stop music or arti before the mosques. They must befriend the Hindus and trust them to pay heed to reasonable Muslim sentiment, right? And so, therefore, he also said that it is obviously wrong legally to enforce one's religious practice on those who do not share that religion, right? So, what he was talking about was trust, tolerance, and the idea of reconciliation. Reconciliation was central to his idea of dharma or morality, or to his idea of Ramrajya, to think of the other through a change of heart. Often on many occasions he spoke about a change of heart, to inspire a change of heart in the hearts of the opponent, rather than to ask to carry on an antagonistic feeling towards the other, or a relationship of hostility with the other religious community. So I think in the Indian society, which has numerous communities, divided along religious lines or linguistic lines, or even ethnic lines as well. This idea of reconciliation was very important in his vision of the Indian nation. And that was for a very long time, for many decades after independence, this idea of peaceful coexistence, of reconciliation, which was inspired from Gandhian ideas, formed a part or the backbone of the Indian secular pluralistic nation, right? And therefore, it is important also to understand what Gandhi meant, what his vision was, as far as the new emerging independent India was concerned, and what should be the role of the state in that newly independent Indian nation. And therefore, again, throughout the 1940s, uh, in the period leading up to the independence of India, he spoke about how religion was to be a personal affair. The state had nothing to do with it. There should be no association of the newly independent state with religion. And he said that if we confined religion to our personal matters, all would be well in our political life. Right. So, there was a very sharp social engineering that we see coming from out of Gandhian philosophy. The fact that if you can only be a nationalist working for the independence of India if you believe that all religions can peacefully coexist in the Indian nation. So his idea of Indian nationalism, which was basically the product of the anti-colonial struggle in India, in which people from different religious backgrounds, from different caste backgrounds and ethnicity and linguistic backgrounds came together in the struggle against the colonial government. It was the plurality of that struggle that became, for a long time, the backbone of the vision of the Indian state. And therefore, he said that religion is no test of nationality, but it is a personal matter between man and God. That Indian nationalism cannot be derived from religion. Therefore, Indian nationalism cannot be the prerogative of one particular religion. Our nationalism was a product of a united struggle. It was above narrow sectarian religious divisions, right? So, therefore, and importantly, he also said that no denominational educational institution should enjoy state patronage, that the state should not associate itself with religious instruction in any way. And also, the state must keep away from all religious bodies. Gandhi was opposed to any state aid to religious bodies. That was also another important reason why Gandhi said that religion was a purely personal matter, right? And the reason and why he said this was because he found remnants of this kind of a cultural democracy in the ancient India as well. He said India was perhaps one nation in the ancient world which had recognized cultural democracy, whereby it was held that the roads to God were many, but the goal was one, because God was one and the same. In fact, the roads were as many as there were individuals in the world, right? So he sort of invokes the ancient cultural tradition or cultural democracy of India, in which there is an openness of thought, in which it is believed that there were many ways to reach God or to reach the truth, and there cannot be one superior way than the other ways, right? So therefore, he formulated the idea of Sarvadharma Samabhav, which meant neutrality towards all religions, that all religions must be recognized as equal in the eyes of the state, and that the state must dissociate itself from siding up with one particular, with any particular religion. Right? So he was very, very clear about the role of the state as far as religion was concerned. For instance, in the Karachi Resolution on Fundamental Rights that he redrafted and moved at the Congress session of 1931, Gandhi declared, the state shall observe neutrality in regard to all religions, right? And therefore, the idea of Sarvadharma Samabhav, which was also embraced by other reformers, social reformers in the 19th century, was taken forward by Mahatma Gandhi, which sort of also shows that Gandhi legitimized his ideas through by taking the rational, ideas from from India's ancient past, right? And importantly, I would just like to also once again add to the idea of how Gandhi was also admired not just by people from the Congress, but people across all religious communities. One, even the atheists. There were two important people who were his admirers, who were atheists, D. Ramaswamy and G. Ramachandra Rao, who for whom Gandhi changed this idea of God is truth to truth is God. Right? So Gandhi accommodated the atheists in his philosophy also by saying that for my atheist friends, truth is God. Right? And therefore, he gave an equal place to the atheists as well by accepting the truth as the supreme end, as the eventual goal for the people. Right? And therefore, I would just like to add with this idea that has been put forward by uh, important historians like Professor Bipin Chandra, who says that Gandhi Gandhi was so popular, immensely popular, not just in India but abroad as well. For instance, there was one German Christian priest living during the time of Hitler, who wanted to meet Gandhi and who wanted to revive Christianity, especially the teachings of Christ, during the Sermon on the Mount, to combat Nazism. He wrote a letter to Gandhi as well, but he wanted to come to India to meet Gandhi too, but could not do so due to lack of funds. But he also, like Gandhi, he said that he would want to learn a lot from Gandhi by looking at the positive and the more rational aspects of one's own religion, right? And so Gandhi was admired by people who were deeply religious as well as those who were atheists as well. Yet Gandhi was never worshipped as a religious prophet, nor as an avatar. neither a guru, right? Also, we've not heard of temples being erected around him, right? But he was revered as a Mahatma, and Mahatma means a revered person or a great spiritual being, a great soul. He was not respected as an avatar or worshipped as an avatar or a Swami or a Guru. So that speaks, the fact that he was called a Mahatma and not a Guru speaks that his understanding about his own understanding of religion, which was not in a sectarian way, in a denominational way, but in a more spiritual way, in a way which was more attuned to morality and ethics, right? I think it's almost time now, and I would like to end here with this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Richa. So it was an enlightening talk, especially I think the value-oriented and inclusive interpretation of religion, which is kind of unusual from many parts of the world, and so on. So I think we'll take questions at the end after the next
Right.
talk as well. So
Yes.
if there are any questions from the audience, please feel free to put them into the chat box in this thing, and we'll come to it. And so thanks again, Richa. So yeah, just,
Sure.
so moving on to the next speaker. So the next speaker is Dr. M. Satish Kumar from Queen's University, Belfast. So he was the former director of Queen's Academy, India, and is currently the director for internationalization for the School of Natural and Built Environment at Queen's University in Belfast. So he's a fellow of the Senator George J. Mitchell Institute for Global Peace, Security, and Justice, and he's a leading international expert in colonial and post-colonial studies focused on South Asia, covering many areas across social sciences and humanities. His knowledge and expertise is widely sought by governments, charities, and other national and international organizations. He has been an active advisor on subjects such as international development and higher education to the Department for International Development, Northern Ireland Assembly, Indian Government, Royal Irish Academy, Belfast City Council, and Habitat for Humanity, Trinity College Dublin, among others. He is currently a visiting professor at the Banaras Hindu University, India, and has also held a number of visiting positions in Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and the University of Calcutta, and the Soka University of America. He has secured key grants to undertake research in India and South Africa, and has published in critical areas of social sciences across a multidisciplinary field, and includes the themes of post-colonialism, decolonization, gender and development, heritage and development, among others. The topic of his talk today is some thoughts on Swarajya. So over to you, Satish, and looking forward to hear from you.
Thank you. I know that I'm at the moment in Delhi, just come out of my almost 7 months of Banwas. And thank you to Richa as an old alumni from my own university in JNU. So it's always a pleasure to see JNU former students doing so well, especially middle-level students and others. So today's talk, I'm not going to take much time because it's part of a larger project on decolonization. And what I intend to do is, I have 3 talks on Gandhi, but today I'm going to be introducing some aspects of my thoughts around that. And I know that Richa's came up, which is very interesting. But what I'm going to do is pick up the idea of Swaraj, some thoughts around the Swaraj and Hind Swaraj of Gandhi. And there's a lot of things written about it, but I thought at least we are commemorating 150 years to see exactly where this perspective, how it has evolved, how it has emerged, and today what are the relevance to the modern context, not just for India, but global. So that's a sort of few words that I would say. So Gandhiji used the term Hind Swaraj, which for him had a distinct connotation. When the son of Dada Saheb Kharpade asked Gandhi what he meant by Hind Swaraj, Gandhiji said Swaraj was independent capacity to sustain or to bear with. The youth was confused with Gandhiji's answer and said, if Swaraj is not going to give us anything in the form of rights, then what use is it? It only means to suffer. Okay? So please understand the context that Gandhiji was introducing this. The earliest reference to Swarajya was in the Constitution Bill of 1895, also known as the Swaraj. It was conceived of and written during the nascent rise of Indian nationalism. It called for self-governance of Indians by Indians, albeit within the British Empire. Okay? So the next time Swaraj or Swelf comes into circulation was from the presidential address of Dadabhai Naoroji in the Calcutta session 1906. At this time, there was a huge divide in India between the moderates and the so-called radicals or extremists in the Indian National Congress. Thus, in the Calcutta session of 1906, Dadabhai Naoroji and the Congress adopted Swaraj as the goal of Indian people. But here a bit of politics was played by the moderates too. They by no means wanted to be tagged as radicals. They toned down the resolution and called it self-government, which meant obtaining the self-governing status in a British colony. Thus, the whole meaning of Swaraj of the radicals was changed in that Congress. It's more inclusive and much more open. So what were the resolutions adopted in 1906? And I just want to draw your thoughts to that. The key resolutions adopted in 1906 in the Calcutta session was resolution on the partition of Bengal that Curzon had determined was going ahead. The resolution of self-government of Swaraj, the resolution on Swadeshi, and the resolution on boycott. So these were four essential resolutions, of which Swarajya was also part of that four resolutions. The challenge faced by India at the time was that of galvanizing action for Swaraj. When the majority of the moderates in the party were spouting liberal idioms, especially when dealing on a day-to-day basis with a brutal, mindless colonial bureaucracy. So colonial bureaucracy was a major hindrance, was a major stumbling block. And if you look at almost all the writings of that period, they all attribute to the challenge of the colonial bureaucracy. And we see today, bureaucracy has not changed from Gandhiji's time. The bureaucracy is still mindless, still very much there in terms of stumbling block to the progress of the nation. According to Maurice Jones, in the political discourse employed by Congress leaders, one could discern three distinct idioms, which he characterized as the modern, the traditional, and the saintly. All the three were deployed in different contexts to win electoral support. Now, nothing is above politics here, and they were deployed very systematically. In urban constituencies, they used modern liberal idioms, and in the rural context, they used saintly idioms, which in fact was the style of Mahatma Gandhi's moral and ethical life. Discourses of Swaraj thus oscillated between these three extremes, depending on the leverage expressed by key players in the field. And there were key players jostling in the field as we were trying to get some foothold against the British colonial Raj. We thus see a clear demarcation between the so-called secular versus the branded communalist. It was observed that, generally speaking, the traditionalists were systematically branded as communalists, as opposed to those who professed liberal and modernist identity. Swaraj, too, came under the same rhetorical battle. And I said, I'm not taking sides with each of them, but I'm presenting the facts as it were. The politics of decoupling, and this is crucial because I'm going to come back to the decoupling debate at the end of my talk. The politics of decoupling from the colonial administration became a call for boycott. On the other hand, selective disengagement was proposed, such as self-rule within the framework of British imperial government. What then emerged was very interesting, in that Hind Swaraj, as described, was not geared toward the issue of governance at all. This point of uniting the people for action and Swarajya, or political self-rule, was the key demand of the mainstream Swarajists. I call them Swarajists at one level. We had Lala Rajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Bipin Chandra Pal. All were considered to be radical, communalist, traditionalist. And they were there as an opposition. There was a fundamental difference between Hind Swaraj of Gandhiji and the group that was Tilak and others who proposed Swarajyas. So few thoughts on Hind Swaraj. Hind Swaraj, or Indian Home Rule, was written by Gandhiji in a dialogic form between the reader and editor of a newspaper or a journal. He wrote this book in his native language in Gujarati while traveling from London to South Africa on board the SS Kildonan Castle between November 13th and 22nd, 1909. In it, he expressed his views about Swarajya, modern civilization, mechanization, etc., etc. This book was banned in 1910 by the British government as a seditious text. Gandhiji deployed moral and ethical arguments in securing Hind Swaraj. He was also guided by deep spiritualism and used Bhagavad Gita selectively. So for Gandhi, politics was a handmaiden of spirituality. What is interesting is that with the passing of Lokmanya Tilak, the ideation of Hind Swaraj by Gandhiji was constructed and positioned antagonistically against the major opposition to Gandhiji, which was Veer Savarkar. Vinayak Damodar Savarkar was there as an opposition. So let us look at how these two people played out their arguments in public. According to Penny and others, the Gandhi-Savarkar dualism helped to highlight the key nuances of Swaraj as enumerated by Gandhiji. Gandhiji substituted the word Swarajya or self-government with his understanding and explanation of Hind Swaraj in 1910. Savarkar, on the other hand, was more concerned in making the tyrannical perpetuation of slavery under the British colonial system. So for him, Swadharma to Bharat Mata was as important as Swarajya at that point of time. However, for Gandhiji, sovereignty was very different concept. And as Richa has already explained, that sovereignty was really critical in the way we were engaging with at that point of time. So let me take some examples of Swarajya as developed by him over the course. For Gandhi, Swarajya involved the reform of the self and the duty to oneself that enables one to serve others. He was always questioning the very idea of self-sovereignty, the self-independence, the self-sovereignty. Gandhi also used the term Swaraj for home rule or self-government for the Indian people. But he makes it very clear that there is a symbiotic relationship between Swaraj as self-rule of individuals and the Swaraj as a home rule or self-government for the Indian people. Very two distinct concepts. In other words, home rule that the Indian people would achieve would be true only to the extent they are successful in being self-ruling individuals. Gandhi used the term organic Swaraj or the kingdom of heaven upon the earth, which has already made a reference to that. I want to also add my bit to that. In his public work, the whole effort of Gandhiji was concentrated on the achievement of organic Swaraj or the kingdom of heaven upon the earth, which he called Ramrajya or Ramrajya, or whatever we may call it. This was to be done while keeping intact the genius of India's civilization. He never wanted to disassociate with the historicity of Indian civilization. And I think that's where some aspects of his secularism comes through quite strongly. Okay? He was not taking sides. Such a Rajya is responsive to public opinion and cares for the lowliest of the low. And I think that is very important. His emphasis on the lowliest of the low. That means the downtrodden, the untouchables, all of that, the Dalits as we call it today. That was his emphasis, great emphasis on that particular group. Public opinion is a vital force in developing internal strength. When the public opinion is free and not artificial, it is truthful. A Rajya built on such a public opinion is Ramrajya. So here again, the politics of how do you moderate public opinion is very important in terms of our progression as a democratic society. So in an ideal state, therefore, for Gandhiji, there is no political power, for there is no state. And he uses Thoreau's idea that government is best which governs the least. That least governance is really important for democracy. But that's an aspiration. So Gandhiji also says Swarajya or self-government means continuous effort to be free of government control. Okay? It's an idealistic perspective, but he also proposed this in the time when people are debating about the form of government, about what we should do after we attain independence or freedom. He says, emancipation of one and all and not for any one class or section or interest. So in chapter 15 of Hind Swaraj, Gandhiji puts forward the thesis that the real challenge is to free the millions of people, but not simply to change the government. How could this be achieved? Not by the use of arms and violence, This is for two reasons, he adds in his book. He adds, one, any resort to violent rebellion would require thousands of Indians being armed, which is itself too tall an order. Two, he also says, more importantly, if India resorts to arms, the holy land of India would become unholy. In the process, India would become a land worse than Europe. He vehemently rejects the use of brute force for attaining Swaraj for India. He introduces arguments and rejects all of these other alternatives. So there is constant battle in his mind when it's the 1919 Russian Revolution, when he's looking at the changes taking place globally. He's reflecting back on that and its implications for India. Okay, increasingly he emphasizes the importance of means and ends. Thus, he rejects the basic formulation of Indian revolutionaries that India could be freed only by violent means, both on moral and ethical grounds. He also rejects the moderates' view, and this is important, he also rejects the moderates' view that India could be freed by mere supplication and presenting petitions after petitions. That will not work, he said, unless it is backed by effective sanctions to exercise our own sovereignty. And he talked about the passive resistance or love force. He also introduces the concept of satyagraha. Satyagraha as a mode of passive resistance, a method of agitation and protest based on truth and non-violence. So satyagraha based on truth and non-violence, which is crucial, not just any truth. Okay? The method of passive resistance consisted of defying the laws, non-payment of taxes, boycott of government institutions. These were the measures that he was inviting the people of India to participate. He explains the concept of passive resistance as a method of securing rights by going through personal sufferings. So the more personal sufferings you undergo, the more moral you become, the more ethical you become, because your experience is leading you to those directions. Here, by implication, he justifies the use of soul force, the force of your soul, as a basis. He further argues that passive resistance is not the weapons of a weak. It's not the weapon of the weak. Rather, it is the weapon of the strength, of the strong. He concludes the entire discussion by saying that real home rule is possible only through passive resistance. But he also hastens to add, he said, passive resistance will have to observe. A true passive resistor, a person who wants to believe in passive resistance, have to observe perfect chastity, adopt voluntary poverty, follow the truth, and cultivate fearlessness. Otherwise, you cannot be called a satyagraha or satyagrahi. So, there was Gandhi, in Hind Swaraj, Gandhi presents an alternative vision of a society, an alternative society, a new civilizational framework. Okay? And true civilization, he makes various attempts to define this true civilization, this Ramrajya that Richa has also alluded to and explained in greater detail. He admits that the present modern India is moving away from these old values. And at that time, in 1910, he makes his observation that India is going to change radically for the future and will not be the same anymore. And this moving away from the old values being replaced by new values, we see that across all civilizations. But he has hopes. He pins his hopes on the bulk of the people of India. He still believes that those people who live in the villages, in the hinterland, will continue to preserve and to manifest this incredible tradition, this ancient tradition of India. Which is still on the time of independence, we would have a new band of satyagrahis who will continue this tradition of change and reform continuously. They will become the exemplars who will be fighting in the forefront. There are other concepts also there, but looking at the critical reflections of Hind Swaraj, he talks about, and I'm just going to pick up some excerpts from his writings. I just want to do so that you can familiarize himself with some of the key ideas. He says, he puts forward the basic formulation that mere transfer of power from the British hands to Indian hands would not lead to true Swaraj. Please reflect, because we are going to come back to this. The mere transfer of power from British hands to Indian hands would not lead to true Swaraj. He believes that this would be nothing more than having British rule without Englishmen. He says, in that case, India may not be called, or may be called Hindustan, but actually it would remain English. Okay, so that again, his fears were coming through. In a chapter, he also talks about how India can become free. He says, it is Swaraj when we learn to rule ourselves. But such a Swaraj, he says, would have to be experienced by each one of us. Gandhiji also talked about Swaraj as home rule. And again, continuing with the ideas of constitutional Swaraj as part of the organic Swaraj. So sovereignty was crucial. Individual sovereignty was crucial. Sovereignty of the state was crucial. It was based on pure moral authority. And Gandhiji wanted India to come into our home, or into our own. That state could not be better defined by any other word than by Swaraj. And he continued in the same tradition. Swaraj meant a state such that we can maintain a separate existence without the presence of the English. If it has to be a partnership, it must be a partnership at will. And he also goes on to speak in Calcutta, referring to one of the Calcutta speeches. He says, Swaraj, according to Congress, means Swaraj that the people of India want, not what the British government may condescend to give. And again, you can see he's pushing the boundaries of Swaraj continuously in the Hind Swaraj, in his book, in his analysis. So initially, Hind Swaraj did not attract a lot of attention, but two critical commentators came through as soon as the book was published. Both were his good friends. Weiberg, who was a South Africanist, who introduces some of the critical commentaries on the book Hind Swaraj. I don't want to go into the details of the commentaries, critical commentaries. I'm going to pick up some elements just for the consideration of the audience. Two major critical comments which came during Gandhiji's own lifetime. And one is by, as I said, W.G. Weiberg, a former member of the Transvaal legislature and a good friend of Gandhiji, despite their differences on racial issues. And the other one was Nehru. Nehru was the other critical commentator on Gandhi's book, Hind Swaraj. So Weiberg's ideas, I just want to pick up some of the things. Gandhiji referred to the Western civilization as a kingdom of the Satan. That means all evil that you can think of is visible in Western civilization. And Weiberg contested that formulation in the Hind Swaraj, that all Western civilization is not evil per se, or manifestation of evil per se. He also talked about the importance of Indian population, that the Indian population has to be galvanized for action. It's not easy for them to really move through with one particular truth. How do you get people who are illiterate, who are of different abilities, come together for a common cause? It's a big challenge, and he was posing that to Gandhiji, that it's very difficult to get all of them to come together for one particular objective. He also mentioned and quoted Annie Besant to the effect that Indian people do not need to give up their desires and activities in order to become a satyagrahi. So again, he says, just to be a satyagrahi, you have to completely cut yourself off from the realities of daily life. So he was trying to provide some sort of common ground. Weiberg also raised questions about passive resistance. And he argues that passive resistance in actual practice would be nothing but transferring the battle and violence from physical to the mental plane. Okay. So again, he says, is the people of India equipped to undertake this great challenge, or the grand challenge of Hind Swaraj? And he also continues to say, it could not be used for political ends, as his primary means was to transcend the world altogether. So in a way, he's saying that you cannot decouple, you cannot delink yourself from the global by creating this unique civilization or unique group of people who can promote a particular worldview. And this was being raised as way back in 1910. Okay? And so Gandhiji then asserted that the primary purpose of his whole Hind Swaraj was to mitigate and, if possible, to eliminate violence. So Gandhiji makes it very clear. He accepts the points of arguments against the book, and he makes it very clear that it's basically to eliminate violence. And I think Gandhiji felt that violence was one of the biggest challenge in India. And how do you transform this violence imposed, perpetrated by the colonial government, by the people themselves in their own daily life? He left Viberg with no doubt that home rule could be obtained with no doubt that home rule obtained by violence would be totally different from the one obtained by passive resistance. He convinced that point of view. Passive resistance was both moral and spiritual, according to Gandhiji. Gandhiji defended his firm condemnation of the Western civilization on the ground that was judged on the scale of ethics. So he said ethics is the key point by which you determine whether civilization is good or bad, in that respect, evil, good or bad. So Gandhiji went on to assuage the fear proposed by Viberg, the fear that he mentioned it very clear. Viberg's fear was that predicated on the premise of complete divorce between religion and politics. Viberg said, you have to maintain a complete divorce between religion and politics. And Gandhi said something very interesting. He asserted that he's in fact working to bridge the gap between religion and politics, as he wanted to test all actions on the touchstone of ethics and morality. So he said he's not trying to keep them apart. He wants to, within the Indian civilization framework, in order to reinforce the importance of ethics and morality. So an interesting point, I thought, which should be considered as well. Trying to keep them apart. He wants to, within the Indian civilization. On the other hand, his criticism was quite clearly defined. Gandhiji said to Nehru very clearly, and he reiterated this in 1945, Gandhiji's Hind Swaraj, which had formulated from 1910 to 1945, in 30 odd years, he had formulated another conceptualization of perception. And I just summarize that. He said, to attain true freedom, the people will have to live in villages and not in towns. This is so because it would never be possible for the crores of people to live at peace with each other in towns and palaces. Moreover, village life alone would provide a congenial atmosphere for the practice of truth and non-violence, without which the world could hardly survive. Gandhiji also said the true joy and happiness could only come from contentment arising from the fulfillment of one's basic needs. That is the only way they could become self-sufficient and would be able to enjoy the true freedom. Thus, the village of his conception would be a habitat of everyone contributing his or her might to the commonwealth. Such a village would provide enough cleanliness, healthcare, and would be full of activities. No one would remain, no one would wallow in luxuries. So Gandhiji, one of the most crucial points about the promotion of the village life, he was most obsessed with the fact that people should not remain idle. Idleness creates huge problems. Okay? Today, unemployment rate, COVID-19, idleness is the biggest challenge for the government of India. Okay? So I'm just putting some thoughts forward, and as I said, I'm just trying to work through it. So Nehru rejects Gandhiji's preference for village life. Village life, which he says village life will be more suitable. And he says, no, why should we think in terms of, why can't we talk about the town, the whole idea of industrialization and town life will transform India for the better. So making a direct reference to Hind Swaraj, Nehru makes it very clear that the total picture presented therein always appears to be unreal. That was his true feeling, that Gandhiji's Hind Swaraj is suspect. And he also says that besides this, the Congress as an organization has never considered that picture, much less even adopted it. So you can see there was a big gap between Hind Swaraj of Gandhiji of 1910, 1935, when he reiterates that same point, and Nehru and Congress, how they were responding to it. Gandhiji again wrote to Nehru in 1945, November 13th. And as I'm coming to the end of this talk, I just wanted to bring that key points about Hind Swaraj. And I would summarize some of the points. He talks about the equality of opportunities. Gandhiji again reiterates the importance of equality of opportunity. Equal right and equal opportunities for all citizens of India. One point. The second point, he talks about the rural-urban divide. How do you bridge this rural-urban divide? Okay, you can have towns, you can have cities, but we have to bridge the divide which is emerging which has already been established in colonial India, the rural-urban divide, in terms of food, clothing, basic needs. And he talks about the lowest common denominator in the Indian society and talks about the mutuality that can exist in this lowest common denominator, the people in the villages of India, the rural society of India, how to make them self-sufficient in terms of the basic necessities. So Gandhiji, towards the end, has become much more attuned to the emerging realities of India as it moves towards independence. And these issues of equal opportunity, equality of opportunities, rural-urban divide, the lowest common denominator, these issues still persist after 75 years, 74 years of India's independence. Okay, so you can see measured responses from the. So in terms of critique and everything else, can we say that Hind Swaraj is based on a realistic assessment of India of 1910, India of 1905, India of 1935, 1943? Is there any realistic assessment? And I think to give due credit to Gandhiji, yes, Hind Swaraj has evolved from that period and transformed the way we understand society then and now and for the future. Gandhiji himself accepted some of the limitations of his formulations of Hind Swaraj. He became more agreeable to assigning a greater role to modern state, modern Indian state. So in terms of concluding remarks, let me pick up a few points and pull them together. If you look at Gandhian ideas today, where do we find Gandhian ideas really emerge, and how do we see the whole prospect of Hind Swaraj? We find that being reflected in the post-development debates and discourses provided by Escobar and others. Post-development idea, what is post-development? Post-development idea is about decoupling from the world of capitalism. And Escobar is the industrial growth model of development with its accompanying consumption patterns and the ideology of materialism is now under fundamental threat and is no longer sustainable. To reimagine development in the 21st century, especially in the wake of weakening and uncertain global economy, coupled with the crisis of three Fs, food, finance, and fuel, calls for a critical evaluation of priorities. Added to this is the issue of planetary limits imposed by sustainability and human security. Can development today be without imposing particular worldviews? How can the issue of self-individual and dissent square against rising inequalities, which is both racial, financial, sexual, and indeed geographical disparities? The deepening of the economic divide between not just the traditional North versus traditional South, but also within North and the South are challenges which have only intensified over. This has challenged the very idea of capitalism and its competitive market-based frameworks and calls for a reassessment of what development means or will mean in the future. And Hind Swaraj, being the source book of Gandhian ideas, has necessarily become a new center for reference now. On a more positive slant, Satyagraha has also acquired its new meaning, its new avatars. Worldwide recognition of Satyagraha has come to exist. We can see that Satyagraha has attracted worldwide recognition as the only right way to right a wrong. The Arab Spring, the Jasmine Revolution in Tunisia are cases in point where Satyagraha is now moving. The Black Lives Matter is also a great example of Satyagraha coming into action today. In a word, Hind Swaraj, despite its apparent polemic style, contains some perennial truths. The question is, how should we read? Should we read as a classic or a manifesto for action? And we see people are still using Hind Swaraj as a manifesto for action. There are three challenges present themselves in the context of dominant ideas of Hind Swaraj in terms of global development. We have seen the rise and demise of Asian China, the ascendancy of Indian middle class, and the Chinese attempt at global dominance as a workshop of the world. We have also seen the gradual decline in all that is economic in the developed north, and today COVID-19 has flattened all the rising curves of linear stages of development. Secondly, in terms of the complexities of development, in practice, there has been a shift in emphasis from modes of standardized economic growth, the ones that prioritizes fiscal resilience, border security, and private wealth creation. These two have taken a severe beating. Development there is no longer about idealistic, universal, or democratic outcome for all, but rather about normalizing what have become persistent inequality. Lastly, the intersection of global challenges such as those of COVID-19, climate change, extreme inequalities, and terrorism have presented real crises in the development outcomes for the immediate future. This crisis demands an approach that enhances interdependence and human solidarity between and within countries, rather than remedial tinkering with the structural contractions and contradictions that persist between the rich and the poor. The morality of economic growth needs to be squared with reducing inequalities, vulnerability, and environmental security. Gandhiji makes it very clear, unless we take care of these issues, we will not be a prosperous society, community. I want to end by Gandhiji's words. I submit, and this is what Gandhiji says, I submit that Swaraj is an all-satisfying goal for all. We, the English-educated Indians, often unconsciously make the terrible mistake of thinking that the microscopic minority of English-speaking Indians is the whole of India. I defy anyone to give for independence a common Indian word intelligible to the masses. Our goal, at any rate, may be known by an indigenous, by the 300 million. And we have such a word in Swaraj, first used by Dadabhai Naoroji. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Satish. That was a very interesting talk, and especially for me personally, I wasn't aware of Gandhi's take on the economic issues and capitalism, which was very interesting for me personally as well. So, so are there any questions at this time for the speakers? Feel free to post questions on the meeting chat.
Hello, Deepak.
Yeah. Santosh.
Yeah, Santosh. Yeah. I think the chat box is not enabled. I could not.
Oh, the chat box is not enabled. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. So, well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
by
maybe
the way,
is the raise hand function available? Can you see
yes.
that? Okay. Yeah. So if so if there are any questions, please raise your hand and we can just unmute. Yeah. So Santosh, would you have any?
Yeah. Just one question to Dr. Richa.
Yes.
So it was a very, very interesting ideas you have given to us. You were referring computer science students, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So basically, the question is there any example of Ramrajya in this modern context? And is there a leadership like maybe who leads like Rama?
Mm-hmm.
So can you just elaborate on this idea?
Well, I would say that in today's context, there are many examples of how Ramrajya is not there, rather than how Ramrajya is there, whether Ramrajya is there or not. Right? Ramrajya is definitely an idealized concept, something that needs to be emulated. And Ramrajya is seen in the attempt to achieve that Ramrajya is seen in many movements, as Professor Satish has also very brilliantly pointed out, in his summary also, in the way people have risen, like say, for instance, in the Arab Spring, in the Black Lives Matter movements, etc. So there is definitely an attempt by people to bring about that Ramrajya. Right? So I think in any movement which is a people's movement, in the establishment of the sovereignty of the people, in any such movement, rather than the sovereignty of a dictator or an authoritarian regime, I think any such movement would be a movement to try to achieve Ramrajya. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Richa.
Yes.
Yeah. So what qualities a leader should be having to lead us to
Uh,
this? Yeah.
as far as the Indian context is concerned, keeping in view the plurality of the Indian nation, I think it is important to be as inclusive as one could be, and to also be able to deliver justice to the people without sort of curbing or eliminating the basic human rights of the people concerned. I think that is very important in the times today. People should be able to live freely, be able to express themselves freely, and be able to practice whatever religion that one wants to without the intervention of the state. I think that would be the principles of an effective leader, rather than just following a majoritarian tendency or giving fuel. I would say, giving fuel to a majoritarian tendency.
Yeah.
In the Indian context, people, I still believe, I have a strong faith that people are still not, generally, people are not communal as some would like them to be, right? But the fact that even Gandhi also said that, the while talking about the murder of Swami Shraddhanand by a fanatic, Muslim fanatic, Gandhi had not blamed that person per se, condemned that person per se. He had said that, it was the thoughts, the vicious thoughts that were circulating, that were poisoning the minds of the people, that led that person to actually kill or murder Swami Shraddhanand, right? And similarly, he would also say for other fanatics who would kill others as well. So again, therefore, it is actually the idea that could either be poisonous, or it could actually help in bringing about greater positivity or greater harmony within the Indian society. And the true mark of a good leader is which side does that person take? Does that person take the side of an idea which sort of completely disrupts the social engineering of a particular society, or a leader who's taking up an idea, beholding an idea that sort of brings together a society? So I think that is one that we can sort of look at when we are trying to see whether a person is ideal leader or not.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Richa. Yeah.
Thank you, Satish.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? Anybody who, well, if the chat functionality is not visible, if you could just raise your hand, and then I can unmute.
Can I ask one more question?
Yep, sure. Sure.
So the question is to Satish. Dr. Satish, your talk was very interesting, and you made a statement that idealness creates problem. So that was
Idealist?
Idealness.
Yes, idleness. Yes.
Idleness creates problem, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that observation was very true in this current context. So my question basically is on what was Gandhi's take on industrialism and thoughts of Marx, basically.
Yes. I mean, yeah, as I said, Gandhiji's, I can't go into too many details of that, but idleness was one of the biggest challenges that we still face. I mean, globally it has been. And I think, we have to put it in the context when things were evolving in the global scenario as well, with Russian Revolution, with Marxism, etc., etc. The whole idea is that Gandhiji at one side was saying that modern civilization was problematic. On the other side, he also was aware of the fact that if people were just sitting on idle, it created more problems for around. So in a way, how do you engage people of India? You have a perspective that's self-sovereignty, that you have self-sovereignty which is based on an engagement, whether it is with your daily life, whether it's with your daily practice or whatever you do. So that's why he looked at the simplicity of rural life.
Yeah.
His leave idleness. And I think somewhere in the back of his mind, he had this idea that people in the towns would
Yeah. Yeah.
be and actually being engaged in something. So you see that fascinatingly, that concept transforming from 9 months Swaraj, based on his experience of South Africa and London, and then going back to that period, and trying to really, sitting there trying to really provide a framework of action. And bear in mind that while he was in London, he was meeting almost all the hardcore radical extremists. They were all do together. They were discussing. It is not that they were sitting in watertight compartments. They were all engaging with each other. So there were things that they were discussing, what to be done, how to be done. So it is for me, what is really fascinating is that the idea of industriousness, the idea of engagement.
Yes.
Engagement, the idea of didn't have, if you're in English, if you did not have the linked languages, you were not getting the salary that you are paid for what you were doing. Even, you had people who would come in because they were able to speak and translate and converse with each other. But I think one of the problems that came in, and I think I must say, I would have said this on many occasions, is the corruption. How do you find that corruption was institutionalized in this period of time? And why is no one talking about the institutionalization of corruption, which has been so problematic? Today, if you look at India, that is one of the biggest challenges that we face in India, that we have taken it as given, corruption. And it has been institutionalized right from the 18th, 19th century, all the way through and through. So yes, it is a big problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Satish. Thank you so much.
So, so if I may ask one thing to actually just Satish. So have you looked at how Gandhi has observed the developments in Ireland? Well, around the 1910s and 1920s. So on.
Yes, Gandhi was aware of it. Gandhi is aware of it. My work, as I said, my sabbatical, my work on decolonization is basically picking up some of these strands. So on Monday, I'll be giving another talk, but there I'm going to completely turn the whole argument of Swarajya on his head, completely separate. So I'm going to provide a completely new perspective on Swarajya, which is from the point of view of his relation to Ireland and so but not references, but I'm sure Richa can add a bit more to it. But I'm looking at the perspective that sometimes there's a lot of glorification about what Gandhiji said and did, and etc. But I think we need to contextualize them. We cannot take it as gospels. So we have to be very circumspect. And I'm quite keen to see new interpretations and new linkages. But yes, on Monday I'll be talking about the founder of Ireland.
Okay. Yeah. Look forward.
Northern Ireland, the foundation for the, and you'll be interested in that. Richard, if you want, Richard, please go ahead if you have something to add.
No, in fact, I would love to hear what you have to say in that talk on on Ireland and Gandhi's views and contextualizing it. Yes, but you're right. You're right about the need to not glorify Gandhi. It is important because Gandhi was not a perfect human being. Definitely not. I mean, it is not right to idolize him, because then we are not doing him justice as a person. If we kind of place him on a pedestal, then we are actually not doing justice to him as a human being. So that sometimes, it is often said that, he was prejudiced against, say, the blacks, the Africans, especially in, while fighting for the rights of the Indians in South Africa, etc. So, again, that is something that we need to look at the imperfections of Gandhi as well, and also contextualize him. I think he was much more progressive on one hand than many of his compatriots, including, people about the rights of the blacks, etc. He had very, very important discussions with, African-American thinkers like Howard Thurman, etc. Right, he spoke to him about the need for non-violence, and we have about 3 decades later the entire civil rights movement led by Martin Luther King. But at the same time, there are people who say that Gandhi was prejudiced, while in South Africa against the African population. So, of course, we need to definitely, I mean, you're right, Professor Satish, that it is important to contextualize the person. That is very important, and not to glorify him. But at the same time, when the world begins to move in a certain direction which is not conducive to a harmonious living, one say, I think it is always important to also look back and look at how relevant Gandhian teachings could be in such a world. Especially when in throughout the world we have the rise of authoritarian regimes. I think in that context, it is important, especially in the post-pandemic, times. It is important to look at how relevant Gandhian ideas could be. And again, I think what he said about application of rationality while reading scriptures could also be application of our 21st century rationality when we are reading Gandhi as well. Take the best of what Gandhi has to offer to all of us.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Richa. That's very a very nice take on take that. So so if you if there are no further questions, maybe well, I'm mindful of the time as well. We're just overshooting time in terms of time. So maybe Santosh, would you Santosh is our project lead from Cochin University. So Santosh, if you're still around, would you just be able to add some concluding remarks?
Yeah, okay. So we had a very thoughtful discussion on basic thinking of Gandhi, and actually the speakers were trying to touch upon the modern context, what it means, and what things we can take from those ideas. Maybe without considering Gandhi as an ideal or a god-like man, something like that. So very, very interesting points put forward. So I think on behalf of the Queen's University, Belfast, and IIIT Delhi, and Cochin University, and the project leads Deepak, Tanmoy, and myself. We would like to thank the speakers, Richa, Dr. Richa, and Dr. Satish Kumar, for spending this time with us and sharing your thoughts. So we are very thankful to you, Richa and Satish. Thank you so much. And also, I would like to thank all the attendees who have been with us for the entire program. So thank you so much on behalf of Spark project of MHRD. So Spark has given us an opportunity to conduct this program. So on behalf of team leaders, I thank MHRD as well for this conduct of seminar. So thank you so much. I think Deepak can conclude. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oops, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Well, this happens all the time, I suppose. So I was just saying thanks to the speakers for agreeing to participate and for the nice talks. And it was certainly very enlightening to hear to hear the various perspectives of Gandhi. And just for participants, so some participants had asked me about whether that they had known some friends who could not be able to attend because of time constraints, and whether recordings will be available. So we are indeed trying to make the recordings available via a YouTube link. So if somebody needs them, or you want to pass it on to somebody, please feel free to contact me later, maybe over the weekend. Yeah. So that brings us to the end of the session. So thanks again to everybody, and yeah, hope to organize more of these things later on, as after the pandemic thing in person as well.
Thank
you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for all this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.